The sun was setting behind the mountains when Rosa decided to make one last trip to the market. She needed onions for dinner, and her husband would be home soon from his job at the construction site. It was Tuesday evening in their small village, and the streets were quieter than usual. Most people had already finished their shopping and gone home to prepare dinner for their families. Rosa had been a teacher at the local elementary school for 5 years. The children loved her because she always found ways to make learning fun. Even when they didn't have enough books or supplies, she would draw pictures on the blackboard and tell stories that helped them remember their lessons. At 28 years old, she had dreams of maybe opening a small library in their village someday, where kids could come and read books after school. Her husband Diego worked hard every day, carrying heavy bags of cement and building walls under the hot sun. They had been married for 3 years, and were saving money to maybe buy a small piece of land where they could build their own house. Right now they rented 2 rooms from Diego's aunt, but they dreamed of having their own place with a little garden where Rosa could grow vegetables and flowers. The market was almost empty when Rosa arrived. Most of the vendors were packing up their goods, but she managed to find what she needed. The old woman who sold vegetables gave her a good price on the onions and threw in some free cilantro. They chatted for a few minutes about the weather and how business had been slow that week. Rosa bought the onions and started walking home, taking the same path she always took. This path went through the center of town, past the church and the small park where children played during the day. There was also a shorter route that went around the edge of town, but Rosa never took that one when it was getting dark. She had heard stories about people having problems on that lonely road, so she always stuck to the main streets where there were houses and people around. But that evening, something was different. As Rosa walked past the church, she noticed a van parked on the side street. It looked out of place because most people in their village didn't have vehicles like that. The van was dark blue and had tinted windows so you couldn't see inside. 2 men were standing nearby and they seemed to be watching the people walking by. Rosa felt a little uncomfortable, but she told herself she was just being paranoid. Crime wasn't common in their village, and she knew most of the families who lived there. She quickened her pace a little and tried to focus on getting home to start dinner. Diego would be hungry when he got back from work, and she wanted to have everything ready for him. When she was about 2 blocks from home, Rosa heard footsteps behind her. She glanced back and saw that one of the men from near the van was following her. Her heart started beating faster, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe he was just walking in the same direction. She turned a corner, hoping he would continue straight, but the footsteps turned with her. Now Rosa was really scared. She started walking faster, but the man behind her did the same. She could see her street up ahead, but it felt so far away. She thought about running, but she was wearing her good shoes and carrying her purse and the bag of vegetables. She also didn't want to look foolish if this was all just a misunderstanding. When Rosa reached her street, she felt a little relief. There were houses on both sides, and surely someone would see if anything happened. But as she got closer to her building, she realized how quiet everything was. Most people were inside having dinner with their families. The street was empty, except for a few parked cars and some dogs sleeping in the shade. Just as Rosa reached for the gate to her building, she felt a hand grab her arm. She tried to scream, but another hand covered her mouth. The man was much stronger than her, and even though she fought as hard as she could, he dragged her toward a van that had appeared at the end of the street. It was the same van she had seen earlier near the church. Everything happened so fast. Rosa tried to grab onto anything she could reach: a fence post, a car mirror, anything that might slow them down or make noise to alert someone. But the street remained empty. Her bag of vegetables fell to the ground and the onions rolled in different directions across the pavement. She managed to make some noise by kicking against a metal gate, but no one came to help. The back doors of the van opened, and Rosa saw there was already another girl inside. She looked younger, maybe 16 or 17, and her eyes were wide with fear. The girl's clothes were torn and she had been crying. When Rosa was pushed into the van, the girl whispered urgently that they had taken her from another village 2 days ago. As the van drove away, Rosa could see her neighborhood getting smaller through the small window. She saw the church tower and the school where she taught, and she wondered if she would ever see them again. The men in the front of the van were talking quietly, but she couldn't understand everything they were saying. She heard them mention other towns and something about crossing borders. Diego came home that evening expecting to smell dinner cooking and to hear Rosa tell him about her day at school. Instead, he found their rooms empty and dark. At first, he thought maybe she had gone to visit her sister who lived across town, but when he called her sister, she said Rosa hadn't been there all day. By 9 o'clock that night, Diego was really worried. He walked to the market to see if maybe Rosa had stayed late talking with friends, but all the vendors had gone home hours ago. He found the bag of vegetables scattered on the street near their building, and his heart sank. Rosa would never have dropped her groceries and left them there. Diego spent the whole night walking through the village, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen his wife. Some neighbors said they had seen her walking home from the market around sunset, but nobody had seen what happened after that. The local police station was closed until morning, so Diego had to wait until the next day to report Rosa missing. When the police finally listened to his story, they didn't seem very concerned. They suggested that Rosa might have decided to visit family in another town and forgotten to tell him. They said women sometimes did things like that and she would probably come back in a few days. Diego tried to explain that Rosa would never leave without telling him, and he showed them the scattered vegetables as proof that something bad had happened. But the police were not interested in investigating. They had other things to worry about, they said, and missing person cases were complicated and time-consuming. They told Diego to wait a week, and if Rosa still hadn't come home, then maybe they would start looking for her. Diego left the police station feeling frustrated and helpless, but he was determined to find his wife no matter what it took. The van drove for hours through the night. Rosa had no idea where they were taking her, but she could tell they were moving away from everything familiar. The roads got rougher, and she could hear fewer cars passing by. The young girl sitting next to her, who said her name was Carmen, whispered that these men had a whole system. They moved people from place to place, always staying ahead of anyone who might be looking for them. Carmen had been taken from her village while walking to work at a small store where she helped her uncle. She was only 17 and had been planning to save money to study nursing. Now she found herself in this nightmare, trying to comfort Rosa while dealing with her own fear. The two women held hands in the darkness of the van, drawing strength from each other. When the van finally stopped, they were at a house that looked abandoned from the outside. But inside, Rosa realized this was no ordinary empty house. There were at least 15 other women and girls there, all in the same terrible situation. Some looked like they had been there for weeks, maybe months. Their clothes were dirty and their eyes had a hollow look that scared Rosa more than anything else. The house had bars on all the windows and locks on all the doors. There was one bathroom that everyone had to share, and the food was barely enough to keep them alive. The Ilai, women slept on old mattresses on the floor, and there was no privacy anywhere. Rosa learned that this was just one stop in a long journey that none of them had chosen to take. An older woman named Luz had been there the longest. She had been a seamstress in her town, making beautiful dresses for weddings and special occasions. She had 3 children and a husband who she said must be going crazy looking for her. Luz had been taken 6 months ago while closing her shop late one evening. She told Rosa that she had seen many women come and go from this house, and none of them ever went home. Luz explained how the system worked. The men who ran this operation had contacts everywhere. They knew which roads to use to avoid police checkpoints. They had people working in bus stations and border crossings who would look the other way when their vehicles passed through. They even had corrupt officials who would make problems disappear for the right amount of money. The women were moved frequently to prevent anyone from tracking them down. Sometimes they traveled in vans like the one that brought Rosa. Other times, they were hidden in trucks carrying legitimate goods, crammed into small spaces with barely enough air to breathe. The worst part was never knowing where they were going or what would happen when they got there. Rosa learned that some women were sent to work in factories where they were never paid and could never leave. Others disappeared into situations that the older women wouldn't even talk about, but their silence said everything. Some were taken across borders to other countries where they had no language, no contacts, and no hope of ever finding their way home. During her second week at the house, Rosa witnessed something that would stay with her forever. A young woman, named Patricia, who couldn't have been older than 19, tried to escape during the night. She managed to break a window and squeeze through the bars, cutting herself badly in the process. She almost made it to the road before the guards caught her. When they brought Patricia back, she was beaten as an example to the others. The men made all the women watch, telling them this was what happened to anyone who tried to run away. Patricia survived, but she was never the same after that. She stopped talking and spent her days staring at the wall, lost in her own mind as a way to escape the reality around her. This incident made Rosa realize that trying to escape on her own would be almost impossible. But it also made her more determined than ever to survive and find a way back to Diego. Every night she would close her eyes and picture his face. She would remember their little apartment and the school where she taught. She would think about the children in her classroom and wonder if they missed their teacher. Rosa started paying closer attention to everything around her. She listened to the guards talking and tried to understand their plans. She noticed which days they received supplies and when new people arrived. She memorized the faces of the men who came and went, thinking that someday this information might be useful if she ever got the chance to tell someone about this place. The women in the house came from all over the region. There was a girl who had been studying to become a nurse, another who had worked in her family's restaurant, and a woman who had been a single mother trying to provide for her two small children. Each had their own story of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or trusting the wrong person, or simply being unlucky enough to catch the attention of these criminals. They all talked about the people they had left behind. Rosa wasn't the only one with a husband desperately searching for her. Carmen's parents had probably contacted every police station in their state. Luz's children were growing up without their mother, not understanding why she had suddenly disappeared from their lives. Despite the horrible conditions, the women tried to take care of each other. They shared what little food they had, and the older ones tried to protect the younger girls from the worst treatment. They told stories about their homes and families to keep their memories alive. Sometimes, late at night, someone would quietly sing a lullaby or a song from their village, and for a few minutes they could almost imagine they were somewhere else. Rosa noticed that the guards were always getting phone calls and talking about moving people to different locations. She realized this wasn't just one house, but part of a much larger network that stretched across multiple countries. The thought was overwhelming, but it also gave her hope. If this network was so big, maybe there were people working to stop it. Maybe Diego had found help and was getting closer to finding her. After a month at the house, Rosa overheard a conversation that chilled her to the bone. The guards were talking about an event where some of the women would be taken to meet potential buyers. They mentioned a place where people came with money to purchase human beings like they were objects at a store. Rosa didn't understand all the details, but she knew this was something terrible that she had to avoid at all costs. That night, she made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would never give up hope of seeing Diego again. She would survive whatever came next, and she would find a way to make these criminals pay for what they had done to her and to all the other innocent women trapped in this nightmare. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to turn this story of darkness into one of justice and hope. Diego couldn't sleep. Every night for 3 weeks he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Rosa and wondering where she could be. The police had been no help at all. After waiting the full week they demanded, he went back to report that his wife was still missing. The officer barely looked up from his paperwork when he told Diego that maybe Rosa had simply decided to leave him and start a new life somewhere else. This made Diego angry in a way he had never felt before. The officer didn't know Rosa at all. He didn't know how she hummed while cooking breakfast or how she always left little notes in Diego's lunchbox telling him to be careful at work. He didn't know that Rosa had never spent a single night away from home without telling Diego exactly where she would be and when she would return. Diego decided he would have to find Rosa himself. He quit his job at the construction site, even though they desperately needed the money. His boss, a man named Roberto who had known Diego for years, tried to convince him to keep working. Roberto said that Diego needed to think practically, that he couldn't search for Rosa if he had no money to live on. But Diego had made up his mind. Every hour he spent carrying cement was an hour he wasn't looking for his wife. He started by visiting every town within a day's drive of their village. Diego would walk through the markets and show Rosa's picture to anyone who would look at it. He asked store owners, bus drivers, police officers, and people sitting in parks. Most people were kind and said they wished they could help, but they hadn't seen Rosa. A few people seemed nervous when he showed them the picture, but they claimed they knew nothing. After 2 months of searching alone, Diego met a woman named Esperanza at a bus station 3 hours from his home. She was also carrying a photograph asking people if they had seen her daughter. Her daughter Marisol had disappeared 4 months ago while walking home from her job at a bakery. Esperanza had sold her house and used all her savings to search for Marisol, but she had found nothing except heartbreak and dead ends. The two of them sat together on a bench outside the bus station and shared their stories. Esperanza told Diego that she had met other families going through the same nightmare. There was a father looking for his teenage son, a grandmother searching for her granddaughter, and several mothers whose daughters had vanished without a trace. They had all been told by police that their loved ones had probably left voluntarily, but none of them believed it. Esperanza explained that she had learned things during her search that the police either didn't know or didn't care about. She had heard rumors about organized groups that took people from small towns and villages. These groups had systems and connections that made them very hard to catch. They moved their victims quickly and often took them far from where they had been captured. Diego felt a mixture of fear and hope when he heard this. Fear because it meant Rosa might be in terrible danger, but hope because it meant she probably hadn't chosen to leave him. Esperanza invited Diego to meet with a group of families who had been helping each other search for their missing relatives. They met every Sunday at a church in the city, sharing information and supporting each other through the most difficult time of their lives. The first meeting Diego attended changed everything for him. There were 12 families there, and they had been searching for loved ones who had disappeared over the past 2 years. Some had been missing for only a few weeks, while others had been gone for over a year. What struck Diego most was how similar all their stories were. Almost everyone had been taken from small towns or villages, usually while walking alone in the evening or early morning. An older man named Don Joaquin had been leading these meetings for 18 months. His daughter had disappeared while walking, to work at a clinic where she was training to become a nurse. Don Joaquin had learned more about criminal networks in the past year than he had ever wanted to know. He explained to Diego that these groups were like businesses, with people playing different roles and moving their victims along planned routes. Don Joaquin had created a map on the wall of the church meeting room. It showed all the places where people had disappeared, marked with different colored pins. When Diego looked at the map, he could see patterns that he had never noticed before. The disappearances seemed to follow certain highways and happened more frequently in towns that were close to major roads. The group had also collected information about suspicious vehicles that had been seen in different towns around the time people went missing. There were reports of the same dark blue van in at least 6 different locations. Diego's heart raced when he heard this, because it matched what one of his neighbors thought she had seen on the night Rosa disappeared. Through the group, Diego learned about a young woman named Lucia, who had escaped from her captors after being held for 3 weeks. She was the only person they had found who could tell them what actually happened to people after they were taken. Lucia was too scared to go to the police, but she agreed to meet with Don Joaquin and share what she knew. Lucia's story was terrifying, but it gave them their first real clues about how to find their missing family members. She described being held in a house with many other women, then being moved to different locations every few weeks. She said the men who held them talked about selling people to buyers in other countries. She had managed to escape during a transfer between 2 locations when the van broke down and the guards were distracted. Most importantly, Lucia remembered some of the places where she had been held. She described a warehouse near a small airport, a farmhouse with a red roof that was surrounded by cornfields, and a building in the city that looked like an office from the outside, but was something completely different on the inside. Diego and the other families started investigating these locations. They would drive by and watch from a distance, looking for signs of suspicious activity. They learned to recognize the vehicles that belonged to the criminal network and began tracking their movements. It was dangerous work, and they had to be very careful not to be noticed. After 6 months of working with the group, Diego finally got his first real lead. A truck driver who delivered supplies to remote locations told them about a place where he had seen many young women who looked scared and unhappy. The women were always accompanied by men who seemed to be guarding them, and they never spoke to anyone or looked around freely. The truck driver was afraid to get involved officially, but he agreed to call Diego if he saw anything unusual during his future deliveries. 2 weeks later, Diego's phone rang at 3 in the morning. The truck driver whispered that he had just seen a group of women being moved from one building to another, and one of them looked like the woman in the photograph Diego had shown him. Diego's hand shook as he wrote down the address. After 8 months of searching, he finally had a real clue about where Rosa might be. But he also knew that this information was dangerous, and he had to be very careful about what he did next. He called Don Joaquin and Esperanza, and together, they began planning what might be their best chance to find their missing loved ones. Diego drove through the night toward the address the truck driver had given him. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the sound of his old car's engine. Don Joaquin sat in the passenger seat, equally nervous but trying to stay calm for Diego's sake. In the back seat, Esperanza clutched her rosary and whispered prayers for all their missing loved ones. When they reached the area, they parked far away and walked carefully toward the building. It was an old warehouse on the outskirts of a small, industrial town, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned factories. The place looked deserted, but there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt and cigarette butts scattered around the entrance. Someone had definitely been using this building recently. They watched from behind a pile of old construction materials for over an hour, but saw no activity. Diego was starting to think they had arrived too late when Don Joaquin grabbed his arm and pointed toward the road. A convoy of 3 vehicles was approaching the warehouse. The lead vehicle was the same dark blue van that had been reported in so many disappearances. The vehicles parked behind the warehouse where they couldn't be seen from the main road. Men got out and started unloading things from the trucks. Diego's stomach turned when he realized some of those things were people. Women and girls were being led from the vehicles into the warehouse, and even from a distance he could see they were not there by choice. Don Joaquin whispered that they needed to get closer to see what was happening inside. It was incredibly dangerous, but they had come too far to turn back now. They circled around to the back of the building and found a broken window that was just high enough for them to look through if they stood on some old crates. What Diego saw inside made him feel sick. The warehouse had been set up like some kind of twisted marketplace. There were bright lights pointed at a raised platform in the center of the room, and folding chairs arranged in rows facing the platform. Men were arriving and taking seats, talking quietly among themselves while they waited for something to begin. Diego realized with horror that he was looking at an auction. But instead of selling furniture or cars, these criminals were planning to sell human beings. Women and girls were being held in a separate area behind curtains, guarded by men with weapons. Diego strained to see if Rosa was among them, but the lighting made it difficult to make out individual faces. The auction began an hour later. A man with a microphone started speaking to the crowd, explaining the rules and procedures. Diego couldn't hear everything clearly through the broken window, but he understood enough to know that people were about to be sold to the highest bidders. The buyers seemed to come from different countries, speaking various languages and wearing expensive clothes. One by one, women were brought onto the platform. Each was given a number, and the auctioneer would describe them like they were livestock being sold at a cattle market. The buyers would raise cards to make their bids, treating the whole thing like a normal business transaction. Diego had never imagined that such evil could exist in the world. Then Diego saw her. Rosa was led onto the platform, wearing the same clothes she had been wearing the night she disappeared, but they were now dirty and torn. She looked thinner than before, and her eyes had the same hollow look he had seen in photographs of war survivors. But it was definitely his wife, the woman he had been searching for during the longest 10 months of his life. Diego almost cried out when he saw her, but Don Joaquin quickly covered his mouth and reminded him that they couldn't do anything to help Rosa if they were captured too. Diego's whole body was shaking with rage and heartbreak as he watched strangers bid on his wife like she was an object for sale. He wanted to burst through the window and fight every person in that warehouse, but he knew that would only get them all killed. The bidding for Rosa was intense. Several men seemed very interested, and the price kept going higher and higher. Diego felt helpless as he watched his wife's fate being decided by people who saw her as nothing more than property. Rosa stood on the platform looking defeated, but Diego could see that she was still fighting inside. She hadn't given up completely even after all this time. Just as the bidding was about to end, Diego heard sirens in the distance. At first he thought someone had called the police about the noise or suspicious activity, but as the sirens got closer and more numerous, he realized this might be something bigger. Don Joaquin whispered that maybe the authorities had finally taken action against this criminal network. The people inside the warehouse heard the sirens too. The auctioneer stopped talking, and everyone started looking around nervously. Some of the buyers got up and headed toward the exits, while the guards began moving the women back behind the curtains. The organized auction was quickly turning into chaos as people realized they might be in serious trouble. Police cars and federal vehicles surrounded the warehouse within minutes. Officers with bulletproof vests and weapons drawn took positions around all the exits. A voice over a loudspeaker ordered everyone inside to come out with their hands up. Diego, Don Joaquin, and Esperanza found themselves caught between the warehouse and the police perimeter. A federal agent spotted them crouching behind the construction materials and ordered them to identify themselves. Diego quickly explained that they were looking for missing family members and had been tracking the criminal network for months. The agent was initially suspicious, but when Diego showed him Rosa's photograph and explained their situation, his attitude changed completely. The agent told them that this raid was the result of a long investigation into human trafficking networks, operating across multiple countries. They had been gathering evidence for over a year, trying to identify all the people involved and map out the entire operation. The warehouse auction was the break they needed to arrest the top leaders and rescue dozens of victims at once. Diego watched from behind the police vehicles as officers entered the warehouse. There was shouting and confusion as the criminals realized they were trapped. Some tried to resist arrest while others attempted to destroy evidence. The buyers who had come to purchase human beings were handcuffed and led away, their expensive clothes and confident attitudes replaced by fear and shame. Then Diego saw the most beautiful sight of his life. Rosa emerged from the warehouse supported by 2 female police officers. She was walking slowly and looked exhausted, but she was alive and free. When she saw Diego waiting behind the police barrier, she broke away from the officers and ran toward him as fast as her weakened legs could carry her. They held each other and cried for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Neither of them could find words to express what they were feeling. Diego kept saying he was sorry it had taken him so long to find her, while Rosa kept saying she knew he would never stop looking for her. Around them, other families were being reunited with their missing loved ones, creating a scene of joy mixed with the sadness of everything they had all endured. Rosa couldn't stop shaking. Even though she was finally safe in Diego's arms, her body still trembled from months of fear and trauma. The federal agents had set up a temporary medical station at the warehouse to check on all the rescued women before taking them to hospitals. Rosa held Diego's hand tightly as a doctor examined her, afraid that if she let go, this might all turn out to be a dream. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, spoke gently to Rosa while checking her blood pressure and looking at old injuries that had never been properly treated. She explained that Rosa's body had been through tremendous stress, and it would take time for her to feel completely well again. More importantly, Dr. Martinez said that healing from the psychological trauma would be a longer process that would require patience from both Rosa and Diego. Diego listened carefully to everything the doctor said. He had spent so many months focused on finding Rosa that he hadn't really thought about what would happen after he found her. Now he was learning that the rescue was just the beginning of another difficult journey. But he didn't care how long it took or how hard it would be. Rosa was alive and they were together again. Everything else could be figured out one day at a time. The federal agent who had spoken with Diego during the raid approached them as they were preparing to leave. For the hospital, Agent Rodriguez had been working on trafficking cases for 8 years, and he told Diego that what he had accomplished was remarkable. Most families never found their missing loved ones, he said, because the criminals were experts at hiding their tracks and moving people quickly across borders. Agent Rodriguez explained that the information Diego and his group had gathered over the past months had been crucial to the success of the raid. Their observations about vehicle movements, locations of suspicious buildings, and patterns of disappearances had helped federal investigators confirm details of their own investigation. Without realizing it, Diego had become an important part of taking down one of the largest trafficking networks in the region. The raid at the warehouse was even bigger than Diego had initially understood. In addition to the 43 women and girls who were rescued that night, police had arrested 67 people involved in the criminal network. These included the organizers of the auction, buyers who had come to purchase victims, drivers who transported people, and corrupt officials who had been paid to look the other way. Rosa's recovery began at the hospital, where she spent 5 days, receiving medical treatment and talking with counselors who specialized in helping trafficking survivors. Diego never left her side, sleeping in a chair next to her bed and helping her eat when her hands shook too much to hold a spoon. Rosa had lost 30 pounds during her captivity, and her body needed time to regain its strength. The hardest part wasn't the physical healing, though. Rosa would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, thinking she was still trapped in one of the houses where she had been held. Sometimes she would forget where she was and become terrified when Diego tried to comfort her. The counselors explained that these reactions were normal for people who had survived what Rosa had experienced. During Rosa's hospital stay, other survivors from the warehouse were brought to visit her. Carmen, the young girl who had been in the van with Rosa on that first terrible night, had also been rescued. She was reunited with her parents, who had never stopped searching for her. Seeing Carmen with her family gave Rosa hope that other families were experiencing the same joy and relief that she and Diego felt. Luz, the seamstress who had been like a mother figure to Rosa during their captivity, was also among the rescued women. Her reunion with her 3 children was emotional for everyone who witnessed it. Her youngest daughter, who was only 6 years old, had been asking every day when her mama would come home. Now she clung to Luz and refused to let go, afraid her mother might disappear again. When Rosa was finally released from the hospital, she and Diego faced the challenge of returning to normal life. Their little apartment looked exactly the same as it had the night Rosa disappeared, but everything felt different now. Rosa was afraid to leave the apartment alone, even during the day. The simple act of walking to the corner store became overwhelming for her. Diego had to learn how to help Rosa without making her feel helpless. Sometimes she would get angry with him for trying to protect her too much, and other times she would cry because she felt like a burden. The counselors had warned them that recovery would have ups and downs, good days and bad days. They learned to celebrate small victories, like the first time Rosa was able to sleep through the night without nightmares. Returning to work was another challenge. Rosa's principal at the elementary school had kept her job open, hoping she would return safely. But when Rosa tried to go back to teaching, she found that being around so many people made her anxious. The children were excited to see their beloved teacher again, but Rosa couldn't concentrate on lessons when she was constantly worried about her surroundings and who might be watching her. Diego had used up all his savings during the months he spent searching for Rosa, so they were struggling financially. But the other families from their search group rallied around them, bringing food and helping with expenses. Don Joaquin organized fundraisers to help all the reunited families get back on their feet. The community that had formed during their search became a support system during the recovery process. Agent Rodriguez stayed in touch with Diego and Rosa, updating them on the legal proceedings against the traffickers. The case was complex because it involved criminals from multiple countries, but the evidence gathered during the raid was overwhelming. Many of the arrested individuals were already pleading guilty and providing information about other parts of the network in exchange for reduced sentences. 6 months after the rescue, Diego made a decision that surprised even himself. He started working with Agent Rodriguez and other law enforcement officials to help them understand how trafficking networks operated from the perspective of families searching for missing loved ones. Diego's experience had taught him things that trained investigators might overlook. Rosa supported Diego's decision to get involved in anti-trafficking work, even though it was sometimes difficult for her to hear about other cases. She knew that their story could help other families avoid going through what they had experienced. Together, they began speaking at schools and community centers, teaching people how to recognize dangerous situations and what to do if someone went missing. Their work led to changes in how local police handled missing person reports. Diego's frustration with the initial police response to Rosa's disappearance had been shared by many other families. Law enforcement agencies began training officers to take disappearances more seriously and to recognize signs that someone might have been trafficked rather than having left voluntarily. Rosa eventually returned to teaching, but in a different capacity. She started working with an organization that provided education to children who had been rescued from trafficking situations. These children had missed months or years of school and needed special help to catch up with their learning. Rosa's own experience helped her understand their fears and trauma in ways that other teachers couldn't. 2 years after the warehouse raid, Diego and Rosa attended the final court hearing for the trafficking case. The main organizers of the network were sentenced to life in prison, while others received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. As they left the courthouse, Rosa told Diego that this was the day she finally felt completely free from what had happened to her. Their story became a symbol of hope for other families facing similar tragedies. Diego and Rosa proved that love, determination, and community support could overcome even the darkest circumstances. They showed that one person's refusal to give up could lead to justice for many people and changes that would protect future victims. Most importantly, they demonstrated that while evil exists in the world, it cannot destroy the power of love and the human spirit to survive and fight back.